Hello, everyone. Welcome, welcome. We'll get started here shortly. Come on in, find a seat. All right, it is the top of the hour. So let's get started. Hello and welcome. My name is Alan Barr with COEH Northern California. And on behalf of the NIOSH-supported education and research centers throughout the country, we're pleased to present the 2023 ERC Ergonomics webinar series, where we offer free monthly webinars on various topics on human factors and ergonomics. This collaborative effort on behalf of each ERC's continuing education program aspires to provide access to current research supported through NIOSH ERC programs. Thank you for joining us today. All participants who logged in with their registration email will receive a link to an evaluation form that will qualify participants for a certificate of completion worth 1 continuing education contact hour. A couple of webinars to speak of coming up April 19th. Is job rotation, considerations for preventing musculoskeletal disorders. The following in our series on May 17th, the impact of precarious work and psychosocial stress on physical and mental health of California janitors. You can register for those and other upcoming webinars at coeh.berkeley.edu/webinars. For today's webinar, you will be muted during the presentation. If you'd like to ask a question, please enter it anytime into the chat, or sorry, into the Q&A, and we'll save some time at the end of the presentation to address your questions. Today's webinar is being recorded and will be made available along with past webinars on the COEH Northern California YouTube channel. Please take a moment to like and subscribe to our channel to help us continue to grow. Today's webinar is titled Experimental Approaches for the Characterization of Prolonged Sedentary Postures Among Sedentary Workers. Our guest speaker today is Dr. Federico Arippa. Federico is a biomedical engineer based in Cagliari, Sardinia, Italy. He received his PhD in industrial engineering from the University of Cagliari, where he focused on experimental approaches for the characterization of prolonged sitting postures using pressure-sensitive mats. He has experience in both clinical and sports biomechanics and is currently a researcher at the Laboratory of Biomechanics and Industrial Ergonomics at the University of Cagliari, where he also teaches biomechanics in the physiotherapy and sports science courses. I'd also like to add that we had the pleasure of his company while he was doing his PhD. He joined us here at the UC Ergonomics Lab for about 10 months back in 2019. So with that, it's my pleasure to hand it over to Dr. Arippa.
Thank you, Alan, for this intro, and thank you all for being here today. In today's talk, as before mentioned, we will be talking about the experimental approaches that we can use for the characterization of prolonged sitting postures among sedentary workers. Some of the presented slides have been partly collected at the University of Cagliari and some at the UC Berkeley during my period spent there as a part of my PhD program. In particular, the UC Berkeley study was supported by the NIOSH and ERC. Since 2019, when I arrived at the UC Berkeley, there is a positive ongoing collaboration between our lab here in Cagliari and the UC Berkeley Ergo Lab. Before starting, I declare I have no financial conflict of interest to disclose. Let's start with a brief overview on today's talk. And we see that the impacts on health of prolonged sitting postures will be described. Then a short summary of the experimental approaches available today for monitoring the prolonged sitting postures will be made. Then we will go through 3 different research studies, which will be described in the results and methods. And finally, the future needs that may help to mitigate the negative effects of prolonged sitting will be discussed. Let's start with a little bit of background. So, as you may know, the prolonged sitting postures have been associated with various adverse health outcomes, which include cardiovascular disease, increase in BMI, increase in the mortality rate, doesn't matter despite the activity level performed during the day, and it has correlated with increased back and neck pain and related injuries. So in order to cope with such negative influences, different movement behaviors have been proposed to monitor people's postures over time. And this particular movement behavior model that you see here is from our latest published paper, in which we focused on the different behavior metrics that can be described for every posture we can adopt, such as sitting, standing, walking, or exercising. As an example, during sitting, we can characterize the duration of sitting and the micro movements that are performed on the sit pan while we are moving around. Similarly, during standing, we can characterize duration or micro movement or the oscillation performed while standing. While walking, we can have a step count, information on cadence, while during exercise, we can quantify the intensity of our activity. Okay, and now we know that the prolonged sitting postures have the side effects, and we saw that there are risks for cardiovascular and metabolic systems. So why do we sit? Well, first of all, some tasks are just more effectively performed while we are sitting. For example, when we have to write on the computer, when we have to read on the computer, when we have to drive, or to make precision-based tasks. We can also sit to reduce the standing-related discomfort on fatigue or fatigue related to long-standing bouts. So sitting is can be seen as a break from prolonged standing. If we focus on the side effects that prolonged sitting has on our back, on our spine, and we compare the loads on our spine with respect to the reference posture, which is the upright posture, we can see that depending on the specific posture that we adopt while sitting, we can have up to double pressure on our spine. In particular, when we are bending forward, we can see the most of the load on our spine. Leaning forward or flexion has also greatly increases intradiscal pressures. And this can cause stress forces, which in turn may lead to low back, to back injuries, not only low back, but mostly in the low back region. Recently, a lot of different discomfort models have been developed to describe what happens while we sit. And this one that you are seeing now is from Fujimaki and Noro, is not so recent, but it gives a great idea of what happens while sitting. So at first, we are in this stable condition. At first, when we first sit, we feel no very low discomfort or no discomfort at all. So we perform a certain amount of movements, which are considered as micro movements. Then we go through a semi-unstable condition when we perform more movements, more postural shifts with also greater amplitude because we begin to feel somehow uncomfortable. And then when the discomfort level reaches a threshold, we need a break. We need to perform a macro movement like a sit to stand or a total change in our sitting posture in order to decrease the pressure under our buttocks, and then we can restart again our sitting task. Now that we have we have figured out what happens while we are sitting, we need some experimental methods to characterize what happens. We can relate on self-report methods, which basically consist in questionnaires about our discomfort level while sitting for long bouts, or we can relate on objective methods, such as sensor-based methods. Regarding the self-report methods, here is an example. This is the Berg discomfort scale adapted to the sitting postures, and this consists in a subjective evaluation of discomfort levels in different body areas, such as upper back, lower back, sitting bones, buttock area, and edge of the seat contact. Also, here you can see an overall discomfort level that ranges between 0, which is no discomfort at all, and 100, which is the extreme discomfort or maximum level of discomfort, which people can experience. So why do we need to monitor the subjective perceived discomfort? Because it has been reported that the level of this perceived discomfort is an early indicator of the musculoskeletal problems. So we can consider this perceived discomfort as a first predictor, early predictor for increased biomechanical risks. For example, for increased low back pain risks. However, there are some limitations related to the use of such questionnaires. For example, we may need to interrupt our working session to answer the questionnaires. We have to answer within regular time intervals, or in this way, our monitoring is not very is not so continuous as we may want when monitoring prolonged bout of sitting. Moreover, discomfort is a subjective sensation, and to gather early information on the discomfort level, we may need to link this information to quantitative data. We have different methods that can be used to monitor the sitting postures by means of quantitative tool. For example, here you can see the Kinect or the IMUs, inertial measurement units, by means of which we can study the kinematics and the joint angles while we are performing all kinds of tasks in this particular case when we are sitting. By means of such instruments, we can evaluate the posture of our back, for example, and we can predict the load on the spine based on previous models I showed you.
Federico, I'm going to take a moment to interrupt you. I'm sorry. Could you do me a favor and take your bracelet off? It's hitting the table and your mic's picking it up very nicely.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
No worries. I apologize for the interruption. Let's continue.
Okay, thank you. So also we can use EMG methods to track the activity of our muscles in the back, in particular, to predict the fatigue level associated with the sitting postures, or we can use pressure-sensitive mats to determine the contact pressures between our body and the seat pan or the backrest. Such instruments have been already used in the ergonomic design for chairs, wheelchairs, for car seats, and so on. But basically, for design purposes, these tests are somehow static, and only pressure distribution is evaluated to properly model the shape of the chair and choose the most appropriate materials to build the chair. How are these instruments made? Very briefly, each sensor is made up of intersected rows and columns of conductive material. And when a force is applied to the sensing area, the resistance of the pressure sensitive material changes, and is simultaneously varies the current and is translated into a digital signal. We can choose for a single or multi-sensor configuration depending on our application, and we can vary the duration of the test up to 6 hours. It depends on the sample rate. I think I've never tried, but we can go until 8 hours. So here you can see an example of what you can see via this pressure map. We can see the peak pressure. We can see the pressure distribution on the seat pan. We can also split the sensing area into different regions to isolate maybe the buttock region and the thigh region in such a way to have as more information as possible in order to model the shape of the chair, for example. All this information can be exported then as a CSV file or as a TXT file to allow the post-processing of the raw data. In particular, we can get information on peak pressures, which are those red points that you can see here. We can have information on the mean pressure, which is the average pressure on the whole mat, or in the different regions, depending on the particular application. Or we can choose to track the center of pressure coordinate. The center of pressure is the point where we consider applied the resultant of all contact forces on our platform, on our mat. Basically, the center of pressure gives us an information on the micro movement that our body performs while sitting. And we can imagine such micro movement as postural oscillations, for example. So starting from this information, in particular from the information on the center of pressure, we can calculate the sway parameters. In particular, the sway parameters are generally used to characterize the overall quality of the equilibrium while standing. However, we can adapt some of these features for the continuous evaluation of sitting behavior during prolonged sitting. In particular, we can obtain information on the sway path, which is the total distance traveled by the center of pressure during the test. We can have information on the sway area, which is the area of this ellipse, which has the probability to contain the 95% of the sway path points. We can characterize sway velocity or the coordinate of this ellipsoid. In particular, if we focus on the evolution over time of this point on the seat pan, we can have information on bigger postural adjustments that we perform while sitting. For example, here you can see that the subject is shifting his posture because is changing somehow the reference point around which the micro movements are performed. In the following part of this talk, I'll be talking about 3 different research studies in which we used such parameters to characterize the sitting behavior among different worker categories. I'll be talking about the sitting behavior of bus drivers, as you can see here, and later I'll be talking about the sitting behavior of office workers. These first 2 studies are somehow related because in both bus drivers are considered. But in the first study, we focused on the characterization on sitting behavior among long-haul drivers. In the second, we focused on urban drivers. These two studies differ somehow because while long-haul drivers usually perform longer routes and have less breaks during their work shift, urban drivers have more breaks during their work shift and also have to cope with more traffic. A little bit of background related to the bus drivers. So the professional bus drivers drive up to 10 hours per day, and they in the meanwhile they have to respect strict schedules while maintaining a fixed position for a long time. They also have little or no control at all over their working environment. You can imagine the cockpit is somehow adjustable, but not totally adjustable. So the cockpit ergonomics really affects their performance while driving. They adopt non-neutral postures, which in turn may influence their discomfort and fatigue levels. This may cause altered alertness, disrupted cognitive performance, and in turn, it can decrease the overall safety of the transportation. For this study, these two studies, our aims were to characterize the driver sitting behavior and to study the relationship between sitting behavior and discomfort level. In this way, we wanted to highlight any occurrence in changes in postural strategies that may be adopted over time by drivers to cope with discomfort or fatigue, but we focused on discomfort association, and in such a way to identify differences between the beginning of the shift, when drivers are generally well rested, and the end of the shift, when the discomfort and fatigue effects are ongoing. We also wanted to identify differences among continuous driving bouts and segmented chunks of driving. For example, when comparing long-haul drivers and urban drivers. For the long-haul drivers, each driver performed between 6 and 7 hours of long work shift on routes that were long up to 100 kilometers. In total, we had 14 drivers aged on average 45 years, and they had to drive for 20 minutes on average of continuous driving. And at the end of these 2 hours of continuous driving, they were allowed to have 30 minutes break. This depended on their actual schedules on the transportation company. In total, let's go to the main results of this study. We took into our analysis as I said, the 2 hours of continuous driving. And at first, we wanted to characterize the in-chair movement, which is the number of rigid postural shifts that they were performing on the sit one. Here, we wanted to see if a relationship with the overall discomfort, the overall perceived discomfort, existed. And we can see that both the in-chair movement and the overall discomfort are somehow increasing over time. The overall discomfort did not increase as I expected before running the tests, but it somehow increased. So maybe the cockpit ergonomics was quite good, but not as good as we may want. As you can see here, we have significant differences in the adopted sitting strategy after approximately 100 minutes from the beginning of the shift. While looking at the incher movements, at the number of incher movement, we can also split the analysis referring to the anterior-posterior direction of movement and the medium lateral direction of movement, which is the longitudinal and the transverse axis of the sit-band. Similarly to what we saw for the general incher movement performed in any direction, we can see here that we have a significant increase around 100 minutes of continuous driving compared to the reference, which was the first 15 minutes of driving. We can see here that drivers perform a lot of movements, a lot more movements in the medium lateral direction with respect to the anterior posterior direction. Probably this is because drivers tasks require them to move mostly in the medium lateral direction. Let's think, for example, about the steering wheel, acting with pedals, and etc. At last, we also focused on the sway parameters, and we tried to characterize how micro movements were distributed over time during prolonged driving bouts. As you can see here, both the sway area parameter and the sway path parameters increased over time. If we focus the analysis on these two figures on the right, we can see that in the first part of the work shift, the number of micro movements is distributed within a smaller area of the sit-band. As time progresses, we may shift our attention in this second figure on the bottom right. We can see that our micro movements are distributed over wider areas, which means that over time drivers are performing bigger movements on the sit-band in such a way maybe to cope with the increasing discomfort sensation. Okay, what we saw overall in this study, which is the takeout message from this study, we saw the general increasing trend in incher movement and trunk sway parameters, which is the macro movements and micro movements on the sit-band. We also saw that discomfort is increasing accordingly to these parameters, to these pressure-derived parameters. And we may find a threshold in incher movement to identify early discomfort sensation. We were also able to characterize the number of the postural shifts in the two different directions. And we saw that the most part of the postural shifts are performed in the medium lateral direction because probably that's just the main direction of the driving action while driving. We saw also the evolution of the adopted sitting strategy, maybe as a way to cope with discomfort sensation. In our second study, we tried to we monitored a cohort of 16 urban bus drivers, which worked similarly to the previous one for 6 or 7 hours long work shift. Differently from the previous group of workers, those drivers were performed after 50 minutes of continuous driving, performed breaks that lasted for 5 to 10 minutes at the bus terminus. And in this way, they had time to rest and to have relief on the pressure on their buttocks while sitting. So the first analysis we wanted to run was we tried to figure out how these periodic breaks, very frequent breaks, acted on the incher movements. Here you can see in green the micro movements, which are the number of movements identified by means of the sway parameter. And in red, you can find the macro movements, which are the number of movements identified by tracking the centroid of the ellipse, which is a sort of reference point around which the center of pressure is moving around. As you can see, after each break, we saw that the drivers perform a higher number of postural shifts. I would say I was there when data were collected. They tried in the first part of the worksheet to find the best position possible, and then they just make some little postural adjustments until the next break. And we can see this pattern repeated. We also focused our analysis in the first part of the sitting bout, of the driving bout, and in the second part of the driving bout. As you can see here, in the first part, this break can mitigate the discomfort effect. So we have a quite constant shape of the intermovement trend here. In the second part, we can see that even though within a continuous driving bout, the intermovements are decreasing, in general, the discomfort level is somehow how can I say, we can see a cumulative effect of discomfort, which in turn results in more and more micro movements performed over time. We also focused on the perceived discomfort, and we saw a similar trend as we expected. The discomfort level went from very little discomfort at the beginning of the work shift to moderate discomfort here. However, some participants didn't feel any kind of discomfort also for the last part of the sitting bout, which is surprising, but this is what it is. A little discussion for these results. So in general, also in the second study, incher movement and discomfort increase over time when considering the overall work shift. We saw that these periodical breaks were somehow effective in maintaining a stable number of the performed incher movement, in particular in the first part of the considered work shift, while at the end of the work shift, we still see the cumulative effect of continuous sitting. Maybe for this second part of the driving task, it would be helpful or necessary to increase the duration of the scheduled breaks in the last part of the work shift, so as to allow the drivers to recover completely from the discomfort sensation and give them much time to relieve the pressure on the buttocks region. In the third study, we focused our attention on the office workers category. This part of the study, of our study, was was run at the University of California, Berkeley. And we were basically tracking the same parameters, the same information that we collected on bus drivers, but in office workers. A little bit of background here too. So as you may know, office workers perform many tasks while sitting, such as computer use, in-person meetings, online meetings, phone conversation, and so on. And a lot of studies have reported that office workers are among those most sedentary workers worldwide, because they spend about up to 76% of their entire work shift in a sedentary position. So for these reasons, a lot of efforts have been made to increase them to move, ranging from changing postures, they cue them to move more while sitting, and all these methods have been proposed in such a way to mitigate the effects of the prolonged sitting. However, while it is possible to monitor the sit and stand behavior by means, for example, of inertial measurement units or activity trackers, only limited studies, a few studies, have investigated the movement patterns of office workers while performing their actual task in a sitting position. And they mostly focus on the perceived discomfort level without using any instrumental methods. So for these reasons, the aim of our study was to investigate their postural strategies, and we evaluate the 2 hours of continuous sitting in this population. We consider the 2 hours because references say that 2 hours are effectively to have information of prolonged sitting discomfort. So we wanted to evaluate if there exists a relationship between the postural strategies and the perceived body discomfort, as we did for the bus drivers, and we also wanted to assess the differences in chair movement between 2 different strategies of working. We wanted to characterize the difference between those who transition between postures while working, maybe taking very short break of 1 minute, between 1 and 2 minutes, and those who work for prolonged bout, staying in a sitting position for all the time. For this study, we had 29 participants. They were quite young, 33 years old on average, and they were monitored for up to 3 hours because, as I was saying, we needed 2 hours of continuous sitting, and they were allowed to have short breaks. Then, basing on these breaks, very short breaks, 1 to 2 minutes, we stratified our population in breakers and prolongers. We defined breakers, those participants who took short breaks during the working bout, and the prolongers were those who did not take breaks during the entire working bouts of the 2 hours. As we did for the drivers, we focused our attention on the in-chair movement trend, and these results were somehow surprising because, as shown in this graph, we saw that the number of in-chair movement is significantly decreasing over time, which means that over time, in general, overall, office workers tend to adopt a more static and rigid posture while sitting, so they perform less and less movements on the sit-one. You can see here up that at the same time, their discomfort level is increasing. So the fact that they are going through more rigid postures may imply that they do not have relief for the pressure in their buttocks region or in their thighs region, and this may lead to an increase in discomfort level. At the same time, we also focused our attention on the coordinate of the centroid of our confidence ellipse, sway area ellipse, and we saw what happened on the sit pan during this entire bout. As we can see here in these animations, we saw that their ischiatic tuberosities shifted toward the frontal edge of the seat. This reflected a big change in their posture while sitting, and the difference of this change was significant after about 87 minutes from the beginning of their work shift. Here you can see the ischiatic tuberosities, which are shifting to forward, and as a result, the average pressure is also shifting from the back of the sit pan to the front side of the sit pan. This may mean that they are adopting either or a slump posture, as you can see here, or maybe they are just bending forward after a little bit more than 1 hour. Sorry, is 67 minutes. So a little bit more than 1 hour of posture. This kind of posture is changing somehow the physiological loads on their spine. When we stratified our population between breakers and prolongers, a brief recap, the breakers were those who took breaks within those 2 hours. Prolongers were just working for all the time. We saw different strategies in their postural behavior. If we focus on the sway parameters, we can see that the breakers are making almost the same amount of the micro movements during the whole work shift. So the breaks that they perform, which were on average 3 to 4 breaks during the 2 hours, I would say those breaks may be effective in keeping them active also on the sit pan while working. On the counterpart, here in the red line, you can see the prolongers behavior. You can see the general trend so in the overall in-chair movement trend. So they adopt progressively more rigid postures over the 2 hours of sitting. In general, focusing our attention on the overall discomfort ratings, we saw that even though the overall discomfort is increasing for everybody between the first part of the sitting bout and the last part of the sitting bout, there were some differences between the breakers and the prolongers. In particular, we can see here that prolongers discomfort level was higher if compared to the breakers, and this may mean that these short breaks may be effective not only to keeping them active on the sit pan, but also in moderating their perceived discomfort level. In conclusion, also for this study, it was possible to highlight some changes in the postural behavior over time. Surprisingly, here we saw that the number of in-chair movement or the micro movement performed on the sit pan did not increase over time. For example, for breakers, was the same amount of movement between the first part of the sitting bout and the last part of the sitting bout, and for the prolongers, they were just moving less at the end of the sitting bout. So they adopt progressively much more rigid posture that increases the level of discomfort because they have less relief from the contact pressures. We also saw that taking these short breaks is effective in influencing the perceived discomfort levels and in modifying the adopted sitting strategies of the office workers, of the breakers. So here is a short summary of future research that are needed maybe to better characterize these behaviors, these prolonged sitting behaviors. So the future steps, if we consider the bus drivers, we can say that the information that we can obtain from pressure sensitive mat may be used to indirectly monitor the driver's comfort state and to give them some cues on taking some breaks when they feel uncomfortable or when they and we can see when this discomfort sensation is reflected on the postural behavior that they can adopt. Such kind of buses, both the long-haul buses and the urban buses, may incorporate technologies which can trigger the drivers just to move more on their seat pan while driving, or maybe to let them modify their schedules to allow drivers to take extra stops maybe, or longer stops when they need. The next step may also be to correlate the sway information and the inch movement information with the fatigue, with actual fatigue, maybe by tracking the eye fatigue while driving to assess if any relationship exists, not only with discomfort, but also with fatigue. At last, different work resting patterns should be investigated to study the influence of the work rest patterns on discomfort, of different work rest patterns on discomfort. For the case of urban drivers, we can say that, for example, brakes were effective in the first part, but not in the last part. So maybe modifying this, their duration may be helpful in decreasing discomfort level. For the office workers, besides using this information for the ergonomic design of the chairs, which is already being done, such information may be used to develop sensorized seat, maybe which are based on quantitative data to trigger people basing on their sitting patterns. So to give a personalized trigger to move more. We can think about the chairs that vary stiffness of the seat band, maybe with inflatables cushions, to relieve the pressure in critical areas where peak pressure are concentrated. Future longitudinal studies may evaluate the effectiveness of such triggers. I'm closing my my talk. I want to acknowledge all the co-authors of our work. I want to acknowledge the NIOSH and the COEH and OERC for supporting in particular the office worker study, and I want to acknowledge the two companies of the public transport here in Sardinia, which were available to let us collect this data. And these are my contacts, and thank you for your attention. Grazie per l'attenzione.
Thank you, Federico. That was an excellent presentation. I realize it's getting late there, almost 9 o'clock in Sardinia, but we really appreciate you taking the time to share your studies with us. We do have time for some questions. And so I think I'm just curious if BMI has been looked at impacting in-chair movement? Has that been investigated?
Yeah, we didn't do that because our BMI was quite constant between our population in the bus drivers. When we focus on the office workers, we had some differences, but we didn't take the BMI into account when considering the sway patterns. But in a different study, we looked at for example, at postural transitions between sitting and standing, and we took into account also the BMI.
Thank you. Let's see. Questions coming in now. Thank you. If you have questions, feel free to throw them in the Q&A. We'll get to those that we can. On your urban drivers versus long haul drivers, was whole body vibration controlled for? Is a question from a participant.
No, we think about it, but we had no. We couldn't account for the body vibration. That could have been very interesting, but we couldn't do that because that was me alone collecting data, so it was quite challenging to have all those information on pressure maps.
Sure. What's your understanding of how whole body vibration might impact comfort and discomfort?
Yeah, there's obviously a relationship between whole body vibration and the discomfort increase, and if we can account for the maybe for the whole body vibration as a covariate in our model, we can somehow delete its influence when we are looking at the relationship between the effective relationship between the discomfort and the in-chair movements or sway patterns. So
thank you. A questioner is asking if there are any, are you aware of any benefits from added cushion attachments to office chairs that reducing pressure?
Yeah, I won't say reduce pressures because we are just shifting the pressure distribution, but they may help. We didn't try to use cushions. We only used standard chairs, but the cushion effect can be studied. There are a lot of works on that, but not performed over prolonged bouts. They are those work focus on the creep phenomenon of the cushion more than in discomfort levels.
If you were if one was a chair designer, what parameters would you suggest they focus on to minimize the potential adverse health effects of prolonged sitting?
I would focus on calibrating the stiffness of the materials in to use different materials in each section of the chair in such a way to mitigate the peak pressure maybe and allow to have a much more homogeneous distribution on pressures.
Thank you. Let's see, some more questions coming in. The average break time. What was the average break time for the breakers during that were taking the periodic breaks?
They were having breaks between 1 and 2 minutes, but someone spent like more than 3 minutes. So that was considered as an outlier, and that wasn't taken into account in our statistics. However, the average break time was around more than 1 minute, around 2 minutes, 1 minute and 50 seconds.
Got you. Were predisposing conditions taken into account? Did you have some sort of questionnaire that looked at pre-existing conditions, spinal conditions, whatever other health conditions of participants?
Okay, we have that information because the office worker study was part of a bigger study at UC Berkeley. So we have that information in the baseline surveys, but we did not take into account that because just because there was so much information in the sway parameters and in the pressure parameters. So we wanted to focus first on the sway parameters, selecting the most important ones, and then we can make this study.
Got you. Have you looked at seat pan pressures over time between workstations in the office that were ergonomically evaluated and adjusted versus just sort of random workstations? Have you looked at that?
No, we did not do that. And here's the thing: the office worker study. For the office worker study, one of the inclusion criteria was to have an ergonomic design workstation that allowed the sit to stand to have sit to stand desks. So that was an inclusion criteria because, as I said, it was part of a bigger study. So all the office workers selected were working in ergonomic environments, in ergonomic design environments.
Thank you. Have you looked at sit-stand stations in the office with respect to seat pressures and movement?
No, that could be interesting. Maybe using a force platform, not a force platform, but a baropodometric platform under the feet of the workers. So we can have information on the sway parameters while sitting and on the sway parameters while standing, while continuously working at the sit to stand workstation. That can be done. We didn't do that.
Got you. A questioner asks about the various types of bus seats and memory foam, shock absorbing technologies, what have you, in your study. Did you account for all these different technologies, or was everyone exposed to the same seat technology?
We were running our experiments always in the same bus, so to avoid differences in seat cushions, for example, or seat ergonomics. So we instrumented one bus for 2 months, and all our data collection was running in that bus.
Okay, that makes sense. A question, I think you kind of touched on this in your data, but the question is, have you run into any studies or information where movement almost ceases because of muscle fatigue? I think you did demonstrate some some more rigid posture adoption later in time.
Sorry, could you repeat your question?
Sure. The question is, have you run into any studies or information related to movement almost ceasing or stopping completely because of muscle fatigue?
Not really. They didn't stop. I didn't find anything about quitting the tests because of muscle fatigue, but I'm sure there's something up there.
Okay, we have time for one more here. Apologize if I didn't get to your question. So with respect to the slide, the animation you showed of the ischial tuberosities moving forward in office workers, were you able to distinguish whether that was an active change by the employee or more of a passive slump slide?
Yeah, this was a passive slump slide. I was there when I collected the data. I had I hadn't the opportunity to have information on the backrest. That could have helped us, but I saw them while slumping progressively. They weren't just doing that proactively.
Got you. Thank you very much. Okay, well, we're running out of time here. I will say that you can learn more and register for our upcoming events at coeh.berkeley.edu. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel where you can find recordings of previous webinars and other events. And as a reminder, all participants who logged in with their registration email today will receive a link to an evaluation form that'll qualify you for a certificate of completion worth 1 continuing education contact hour. If you have any questions for us here at COEH Northern California, you can always drop us a line at coehce@berkeley.edu. That's coehce@berkeley.edu. I want to say a big thank you to our presenter today. Great to see your smiling face. And would you have any closing comments there, Federico?
Just stand up now and take a break.
That's great advice. I'm planning on it. Thank you so much. And thank you. Bye-bye.